What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander. We're back for another episode of Millzy Revisits, the show where this winter I have rebuilt almost all of my main decks and all of the decks that I've been testing. And this is the show where we talk about what my decks do, how they were rebuilt, what lessons I've learned over my time playing them, and just kind of giving a little bit of an homage to the decks that I love and the decks that I play. We've gone through a lot of decks already, 3 decks of my main decks, but today we are back for Miirym, Sentinel, Wyrm. This is a deck that, to me, pushed my love for dragon decks up to a new level. I had been messing around with Clouth and a Gruul Dragons list, and it was something that I really enjoyed. But when we saw Miirym in the Baldur's Gate Command Legends 2 previews, I immediately said, I'm going to break that. That's going to be a ton of fun. And that's what I set out to do, was not to go too insane with breaking it. I wanted to keep it a good mix of mid-range dragons and kind of combo, but I looked at it and said, I can think of 8 or 10 dragons off the top of my head that with that copy ability we can have a ton of fun with. And so that has been and is in going forward is going to be the goal of Miirym. Miirym says, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. There's not a single dragon in the game that you would want to play in this deck that you wouldn't want a second copy of. And so the cool part about making the token is that the token is already made not legendary, which means Panharmonicon, Doubling Season, all of these cards will make other non-legendary copies as well. So we're going to add on to the value of already getting a non-legendary copy of our dragons and getting more of them. So, as I like to do with all the decks, let's start with the land base. I have gotten some comments in the past where people ask me how I build my land bases. What do I like to consider? And I think this deck is a good example of how I feel for tribal decks. You have your shock lands, you have your fetch lands. We're playing the check lands because we're playing fetch lands, right? Almost always the first fetch is going to go catch your Triumph, it's going to go get your Triumph. So most of the time your check lands are going to come in untapped because that's the first thing you're going to go get. We're playing the commander lands that come in untapped if you have 2 or more opponents, because more often than not, that's going to be the case. But we are reaching into the Cavern of Souls, Path of Ancestries of the world to get some added flavor there. Now, the cool part about dragon decks is we get to play Haven of the Spirit Dragon, which does a pretty good job at giving us extra mana there. We're playing Plaza of Heroes because we do have a lot of legendary dragons in the deck, so it ends up being good mana. Nykthos is an outland that I absolutely love. When you're playing with a lot of permanents, Nykthos just tends to boost you forward on mana. And then we're playing Urza Saga because we do have a couple of cheap artifacts that we want to go get. Enchantments. So when I immediately saw Miirym, I immediately had 2 ideas for Miirym. The first thought was Sneak Attack, right? Sneak Attack is a card that says for red mana, you can choose a creature card in your hand and put it on the battlefield. That creature has, haste, and then at the end of the turn, you sacrifice it. Well, the cool part there is we're paying 1 red mana to put any dragon in our hand onto the battlefield and getting a copy of it as long as we have Miirym out. I would much rather pay 1 red mana for any dragon in my hand than full cost. And the cool part here is we keep the token, but we lose the original, and I think that's okay. I think a 1 red mana for that blitz of haste is more than worth kind of that momentum swing that can happen when you're putting those creatures down. And the second is Molten Echoes. Very similar to the creature type. Whenever a non-token creature of that type enters the battlefield, create a token of that copy. That token gains haste. Now, the bad part about Molten Echoes is this one doesn't remove the legendary status from the dragon. So it's not, Molten Echoes isn't a complete replacement of Miirym because it doesn't strip the legendary moniker off of the dragon. And I think that's just something we kind of have to live with. I think more often than not, we have enough non-legendary dragons, Goldspan Dragon, the Ancient Dragons, Tear the Peaks, Scourge of the Throne. There's so many great dragons that aren't legendary that you want that extra copy of, and that extra copy gets haste, and then you exile it. You exile the token at the beginning end step. So this is kind of cool because it's kind of the flip side of Sneak Attack, right? Sneak Attack is the original gets haste, and then we lose the original at the end of the turn. The cool part about Molten Echoes is, well, we get another copy, and that copy gains haste, so we keep the original. So that's kind of interesting, right? And then we pair this up with the third one, which is Flame Shadow Conjuring. Very similar as to Molten Echoes, except we have to pay a red to do it. These three enchantments are in here together because I think they all satisfy a very similar idea of what we're trying to do. Get them down, amass value every time we get a dragon into the battlefield. The cool part about the Molten Echoes and Flame Shadow Conjuring is if we do any blinking of any of our creatures, which is, I've added a couple more cards in here than I did last time, we get to use those for that, whereas Sneak Attack won't. Of course, Sneak Attack is just an engine to get things down in. But the card that I immediately thought about as well when I looked at Miirym was Dragon Tempest. Dragon Tempest's bottom ability says whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, deals X damage to target creature or player where X is the number of dragons you control. Well, let's say I have Miirym out and I play a dragon. That comes in, Dragon Tempest sees it. Now we deal 2 damage. The token comes in. That's 3. If we get an extra copy of the token, that's 4 now damage. And as you can see, as you start building your board wider, you're going to start ending games. And I've ended plenty of games of Dragon Tempest on a board of dump, Sneak Attack plus Dragon Tempest, dump a bunch of dragons and just start letting off damage. The cool part about this Dragon Tempest game plan is we have 2 creatures that kind of do a very similar thing. We have Scourge of Valkus, which says whenever it or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control, right? So very similar to that Dragon Tempest effect. But we also have Terror of the Peaks, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So Scourge of Valkus is a similar kind of piece to Dragon Tempest. I think they kind of are interchangeable, whereas Terror Peaks is almost better because depending on what dragon we're putting down, it could almost be better to have if we put down a really high powered dragon onto the battlefield. The other cool part about Dragon Tempest is whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield, it gains haste until end of turn. So Dragon Tempest basically eliminates a lot of the problem we have of our dragons come down and not do anything. I think Temur Ascendancy also does a very similar thing where it just gives all of our creatures haste flat, and then we draw a card whenever a dragon comes in. This pairs with things like Kindred Discovery and Garruk's Uprising and Elemental Bond to draw us cards when creatures come in and kind of refill our hand and keep us going. It's very easy in this deck with things like Old Gnawbone and Ancient Copper Dragon to get a bunch of treasure tokens and Clouth to get a bunch of mana. And so we want to kind of keep ourselves moving forward. If we're going to go for a big combo finish, we want to make sure we have enough mana and enough card draw to finish the game when we get there. Doubling Season is doing about what you'd expect it to do, double those tokens that get made off of Miirym. Kindred Discovery kind of goes with the draw, but it also draws when we attack, and I think that's equally as good as well because it kind of gives us the value off both of them. Rhystic Study, just your classic draw. Rhystic Study is almost always worth 3 mana, even if you only draw 1 card. I'm fine with it being a lightning rod for removal, because at least you'll still get your value out of it. Rain of Riches is one of my favorite cards that's been printed in the last year. And I think it fits Miirym really well because we have enough dragons that care about treasures anyway, that more often than not, Rain of Riches is going to cause us good values. When it comes in, we get 2 treasures, and then the first spell you cast each turn with mana from a treasure that was spent to cast. It has Cascades. You only get 1 spell per turn off of Rain of Riches, but I think it's more than worth it depending on what you're casting and what you're cascading into. Now, some of the cards that make this deck kind of spike a little bit above the price range that most people probably wouldn't want to play it. Survival of the Fittest, Sylvan Library, and then we'll get into stuff like Mana Crypt up in the artifacts. These are here because this deck has tended to be one of my more powerful decks. I got a copy of Survival of the Fittest from my staple binder. If you guys want to learn about my staple binder, go back on the channel. I've explained my concept of the staple binder and what it is. But it's really allowed me to put cards like Sylvan Library and Survival of the Fittest in more of my decks and kind of test them and put them through the ringer and see kind of what they can do for us. We have the Ag Assault Bear combo, Bear Umber combo. The Sword of Feast and Famine is in there as well because Unfortunately, Klaus mana can't pay for Aggravated Assault. We still need a way to use our lands or treasures or things like that to pay with Aggravated Assault. So I think these two help a ton. But just hitting a massive attack with a Gnawbone out or something like that and getting a bunch of treasures can also combo with Aggravated Assault. These guys are just in here because they're two very easy ways to combo with Aggravated Assault. Getting into the artifacts, we have Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Crypt. These guys are just helping us get that mana. Soul Ring and Crypt are both searchable off of Urza Saga. It's very uncommon you're going to see both of them. So most of the time that Urza Saga will always be able to get the other. The one big thing I added this time around, I was playing Mirror Box, and the goal there was so that when you put down a legendary dragon with Wyrm out, you're not losing off of sneak attack or that kind of thing. You're not losing tokens as you go. And if you're playing with Molten Echoes and Flame Shadow Conjuring, and let's say you lose Miirym, but you still have Molten Echoes or Flame Shadow Conjuring, you don't lose kind of the value off making those tokens off of those cards with that. We've been playing Panharmonicon because Panharmonicon doubles that trigger from Miirym, and it makes it even better. But I think the two big cards added this time were Jade Orb of Dragonkind, giving that creature hexproof. This is great for Miirym because Miirym tends to be a lightning rod as soon as it comes down. The cool part about the Jade Orb is although Miirym has Ward 2, you still have the hexproof for that turn that you can sit on top of it. And then Lithiform Engine, I don't think it's a card maybe many people have thought about. The 2 mana tap can copy Miirym's ability. The 3 mana can copy other things if you need to copy removal or things like that. But the 4 can actually copy dragons. So that's kind of interesting. Just remember, if you copy a dragon dragon creature spell that you're casting, the copy does come in as a token, and so it won't trigger Miirym's ability. But you would still get an extra copy for the purposes of anything that you need to do. Getting up into the spells, the spell landscape of this deck hasn't changed very much since the last time I brewed it. The big 2 adds were Ghostly Flicker, just to give me the ability to bounce a couple dragons, bring them back in, get another token copy, and then Expressive Iteration. I really like Expressive Iteration, especially in Commander. I think if you can play this before you play your land for turn, it opens up possibilities to kind of see more cards out of your deck, get more value. Of course, there are going to be the times where you Expressive Iteration and you hit something you can't play, and that's kind of feels bad. But I think more often than not in this deck, you're going to hit a land, you're going to hit a cheap mana rock, something like that, something you can play and kind of move your board state that way. Playing the Nature's Lore and the 3 visits to go get our dual lands if we need them. Or Into the North, Rampant Growth are our 2 mana basic land options. We're playing all snow basics so that Into the North can grab us a basic land as well. Farseek, of course, can go get the tri-land if needed. Otherwise, can go get those dual lands. And then we are playing a Cultivate just to help get some more lands if need be. Jessica's Will is never a bad card in a deck that needs mana, especially when our dragons cost so much. It's a great one. Blasphemous Act is our board whip of choice because it combos with Wrathful Red Dragon. Wrathful Red Dragon says whenever a dragon you control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dragon. This plus a good board of dragons and Wrathful Red Dragon can end the game by just dealing all of that damage to your opponents. That's pretty cool. Under the instance, Brainstorm to help us draw, Psych Rift, of course, to push our opponents backwards, Fierce Guardianship to help with that one pesky spell when it comes up, Heroic Intervention to protect the board, Reality Shift to have a little bit of removal, and Worldly Tutor just to go get the creature combo pieces if we need them. We are playing Survival of the Fittest, but we're also playing that Worldly Tutor, and I think both help a ton at getting the kitchen sink worth of dragons that we have here for value, depending on what we need. So we'll get into the dragons. I have a good feeling that if you know anything about dragon decks, especially red-green dragon decks or up that realm, this is a cross section of dragons that isn't going to surprise you. But I want to talk about the dragons that one, have done really well for me that I didn't expect, and 2, talk about the newer dragons I've added in. So the ones that did really well for me that I didn't expect to. Earthquake Dragon, at first, I thought was just going to be a big menacing 10/10 that was going to be tough to deal with. And I thought, okay, well, if we can get it down to just a single green with its Gulta Primal Hunger type ability to make it cost less, I figured, okay, we get 2 10/10s and it's just a good creature. Well, this plus Terror of the Peaks is now 20 damage that you get to load out with Miirym out. And I think that that changes the tide of a lot of games. Astral Dragon from Crown of Legends. When I first read the card, I knew it was going to be bonkers. I had seen people post about doubling season and different things, combos that it can combo with. And I said, okay, Astral Dragon looks good, but is it that good? And the answer to your question is, if you have a board of permanents with Scourge of Valkus, Dragon Tempest, any of those cards that deal damage when things comes out, Astral Dragon will end the game. If you compare it with doubling season, it's going to end the game even faster. But even on a board where you don't have it and you can copy mana rocks, you can copy other things, more dragons are coming in, more triggers are happening, and like I say, this plus doubling season goes near infinite because you make the two creatures, you make the two copies, and then you kind of just keep going down the chain. It's kind of interesting the way it all works and the way it works out. It's kind of crazy, to be honest. It's kind of crazy. So the way that Astral Dragon works with doubling season, I just realized that doesn't make a ton of sense. So when Astral Dragon comes in with Miirym out, the first Astral Dragon is going to copy doubling season, and you're going to get four doubling season dragon copies. But then you have the copy of Astral Dragon that now comes in. You're going to target the original doubling season again, and instead of making the four copies, you're making 4 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 copies of doubling season. And if you have any impact tremors, any of those abilities, now you're just putting a ton of mana, triggers on the stack, and that helps you end the game. I really like Blast Furnace Hellkite. I haven't seen it yet in a game, but I think it is going to give a really good spot because it has Double Strike, which is going to come in handy. And then creatures attacking your opponents have Double Strike. This just kind of allows you to kind of empower your opponents to not attack you, because if they attack your opponents, they get Double Strike. And I feel like that's going to be a hard thing for them to pass up, especially if they need that Double Strike to help them with their game plan. Right, I like Sign of Draco. This seems like an interesting card. So in this deck, you will get Hexproof if the dragon's blue, First Strike if it's red, and Trample if it's green. I think all three of those just help, especially the Hexproof when it comes to Miirym. But it's a card that's going to come down pretty cheap most of the time, because we're not going to hard cast it. Most of the time we're going to cheat it out with like Sneak Attack, and it's just going to help. I think Sign of Draco is just an interesting choice, and it helps our board still roll. I threw Immrith in to get that little bit of nominal card draw, and then it has the ward 4 as long as it's untapped, so that theme's kind of cool. And it kind of felt right to have all three of the Avenger of the Forgotten Realm dragons, if we could. Old Gnawbone, Ancient Copper, and Goldspan Dragon are the 3 all-star dragons for treasures, because they both just help you amass treasures. If that's the game around you want to go. Klauth and Savage Ventmaw are your targets for mana. Klauth, of course, gives you a ton of extra mana and can lead into a bunch of fun wins that way. Savage Ventmaw is another creature that pairs really well with Aggravated Assault, because the 6 mana that it gives you can pay for another attack of Aggravated Assault. So we kind of have 3 cards that pair with Aggravated Assault to go us down that kind of infinite combats, that kind of route. And we don't want to just win by combo. We also want to set ourselves up to win by combat if necessary, because we are playing giant dragons in the air. Every other dragon in the list, I think I've either mentioned why it's good, or it just does what you want it to do. Hellkite Charger is another one where you can pay for the infinite combat. Scourge of the Throne gets one on its own, as long as it's attacking a player with the most life. Hopefully it's not us, so that we can get the trigger, but worst case scenario, you're just taking a good hit. And then Atarka's in here to give all of our dragon Double Strike when it attacks. It's just going to be devastating for most people. Ancient Copper and Silver Dragon are 2 of my favorites for the deck, because there's nothing like Ancient Silver Dragon hitting an opponent, rolling a d20, drawing 14 cards, having no man's hand size the rest of the game, and then just proceeding to find your combo pieces you need, or other pieces you need to just push the game forward. If you're playing against a Miirym deck and something's going to be sneaking, attacking in, and swinging at you, I'd be very careful of the Ancient Dragons, because yes, at the end of the day, the RNG comes down to a d20, but treasures and drawing cards are not something that you want someone to roll over a 3 or 4, because then it just gets worse, and it's going to be a lot harder to deal with. So I hope you guys enjoy this deck. This deck is a ton of fun. It's one of the favorites that I've built over the last year. It's definitely been working its way up the deck box as far as decks that I truly enjoy playing. The deck list is going to be down in the description, so you can see it. You can let me know what you think of Miirym. Let me down in the comments. Do you have a Miirym list? What do you play that I don't play? What do you think of my Miirym list? And I will catch you next time.